talk about and normalize things about. I'd like to welcome all of you. I am Joyita Banerjee, and I am one of the third years of the Symposium Society. The Symposium Society is the deliberation and policy forum of the college, and colloquium is our seminar sessions that we conduct on regular basis. Today's colloquium is indeed very special, and we'd like to introduce the speaker for today's colloquium. We have with us Amrita Tripathi ma'am, and Amrita Tripathi ma'am is an award-winning journalist and a former television news anchor. She's also a published author and the founder editor of thehealthcollective.in, an online repository for conversations around mental health and illness in India. She's written 2 novels, and one more novel is underway. She's co-authoring the 3 books, 3 non-fiction books, and everything with leading psychologists. We welcome you, ma'am. It's really honoring to have you with us. And I don't think I can stress enough upon how important mental health is and how we people should make it a part of our daily dialogue. Besides this, I would also like to thank Friends Corner for collaborating with us for this. The pattern for today's event is going to be like we'll have a 30-minute speaker address followed by a 30-minute question answer series. So in case anybody has any questions regarding to ma'am's address or anything otherwise, we'd request you to please drop them in the chat section. Please stay tuned till the end of the session, because the participants who stay till the end of the session and fill the feedback form would be given the participation certificates. I would also request everyone to stay muted so that there is no commotion. And I think we're good to start. Amrita ma'am, over to you. We'd like to have a keynote address from you, and I think we can get started. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joyita and Siddharth and the team for reaching out. And it's great to see so many folks here. I might just try to present a couple of slides while I'm talking. Is that cool? Joyita, can I just do that? Okay. So basically, I will start by introducing myself and why I am talking to you about mental health. I'm not a therapist. In fact, my background is, as you heard, as a journalist, as a writer. And 4 years ago or so, I set up a site called The Health Collective, which the idea of that was to have a safe space online to talk about mental health and mental illness from an India lens. There were not that many spaces at the time, and I thought it was important, having spent some of my career as a health editor and covering other issues. We realized from the interviews we were doing that mental health is very underserved in terms of the mainstream media, and these are conversations that need to really get out. So I will be talking to you probably for about 20-25 minutes. I want to share a few slides as I go, so you can also, let me see here. So you can also track some of what I'm doing, and of course, happy to take questions. But I should, again, emphasize, this is something I promised my mom I'll do each time, that I'm not a therapist. So we'll keep that in mind. I just want to double check you can see my screen. Maybe Joyita, you can unmute if you can't see this. Is this visible?
No, it's visible.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So the reason I talk a lot more, let me start by saying, as an author, I've written 2 novels, which had to do a lot with relationships, urban realities, and sort of fractured identities. And that was really how I started writing as an author. And these are, this is Broken News, this is The Sibious Knot. But here to talk to you a little bit more about what we've been doing with the Health Collective, what we've realized, and how the mental health sort of landscape has changed, really. The narrative has changed in the last several years. Now, the thing is that we do know that there are many.
Ma'am, you're muted.
Yeah, it was Annie's name or something.
I think someone muted me. Okay, that's fine. So I'll come back to the presenting perhaps after. I will. I think Annie is muting me. Does someone else want to speak?
Yeah, Annie's name.
Okay, I'll come back to presenting in any case. So what I was saying was that, we realized over the years that, the mental health situation is such that there's a lot of confusion when we talk about it, especially in India. There's a lot of stigma. Many of you will know there's a lot of discrimination. And one of the first things I want to say to you, especially in this year where so many people are feeling so many concerns, including anxiety, including worry, this is not something new. Of course, the severity of the crisis we're going through, it does mean you'll see more and more of these conversations. And there's certainly tips we can share with you from what experts have been telling us on how to take care of your own mental health. But the number one issue has been, we also confuse a couple of things. One is every single one of us here has mental health. Mental health is what you think about when you think about wellness, when you think about how you're doing, if any of you ever do like a check of how you're feeling, emotionally, spiritually, not just physically. Mental illness is something that affects a lot of people as well, but let's not conflate the two. Mental illness is more common than you think. And some of you, might just be thinking that, there's no point, I don't need to know any of this, it's not going to affect me. And I'm here, unfortunately, to tell you that probably in your lifetime it will. One is, as I said, all of us have mental health, right? If I'm having a good day, I'm having a bad day, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, that all comes broadly under mental health and wellness. Two is the World Health Organization has a pretty, often quoted statistic that 1 in 4 people in their lifetime is going to have a mental health issue at some time or the other. So, whether we like it or not, these are things that are going to impact most of us in this conversation. And there are things that you should know that can help you equip yourself. So whether it is to help yourself at some point, whether it is to know that somebody you love or care about might need help, these are all conversations we need to start having. The idea, as I said, behind the website was to have these conversations with an India perspective. So our stories are from, Haryana, Maharashtra, Punjab, Odisha, all over the country. We have about 300 stories on the site right now, which include first-person stories, expert columns. We've also done a comic series, and artists are sharing some of their own, journeys through comics. And the thing that we realized is no matter what any of us feels, no matter what you think you're going through, as unique as you are, you're not alone. And I think more than ever, the more connected we are virtually and socially, but certainly in a year like this year, it's made us realize how important it is to know that you're not alone. We talk about physical distancing. We talk about the need right now in this year to stay safe and keep ourselves safe. There is a huge pandemic, of course, behind the scenes as well, right? There's a crisis of loneliness. There's a crisis of anxiety, depression. These are all issues that are affecting a lot of people in this country. And if you think about how the trajectory has changed, it's probably that, the generation before mine and certainly my grandparents' generation found it very difficult to talk about mental illness. And again, just do remember, mental health is something we all have. Mental illness is something that affects quite a high proportion of people when you look at all of the disorders that are possible. We didn't always have the vocabulary for it. We didn't always have the legislation. There was a landmark legislation brought in a few years ago, the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which was a rights-based legislation and very important to everyone in this country. But I think the more interesting thing for some of you, because, of course, you're coming from different fields, you're thinking maybe some of you will go on to be, in government, in academia, in industry. I will again reemphasize, it's not that anyone is immune to mental illness. In your lifetimes, certainly in your young adulthood and your adulthood, you will find people who will be dealing with things, and it's always better to know how you can be an ally, how you can be empathetic, and how maybe you can be part of somebody's journey towards healing. Now, the first step, of course, is having conversations, right? Because if we're pretending none of this is happening, or we're ashamed, and it's a very strong feeling, right? Internalized shame. Many families have had to go through the stigma, the discrimination, would rather not deal with something that's going on. That is something we collectively need to break. So it might be easy for me to sit here. I sometimes do these panels and I say, it might be easy for me to sit here and tell you, let's all move together and, make things better. But the fact is, unless we're able to have these conversations in our own families, with our own friends, in your own workplace when you start working, in your own colleges, it's going to be very difficult for us to move the needle on this. Now, the need, first things first then, is to be able to talk openly. It doesn't make you a freak or weak or a weirdo or any of these insults or slurs to admit you might need help with something. And eventually when I present again, I'll show you a couple of comics we did based on what people were saying. And again, I suppose if there's one thing you take away from this talk, it is that we all have mental health. The number two thing is, it is a huge issue, right? Some of you, again, might be thinking, why should I care? What can I even do? There's a very simple thing you can start doing, each one of us can do from today onwards, and that is to choose to be kind. In all of the languages we speak, we have all kinds of insults and slurs that actually denigrate and mock people who have mental illness. So it's one of the comics I do want to share once I present the screen again, which came from somebody who lives with schizophrenia, as a high functioning corporate HR executive, and she was just so mad and upset, and she's like, I'm so tired of people using schizo or psycho or these kind of words like galis without thinking about what they're actually meaning. So I think that's one thing you can do as a takeaway that will actually make the world a better place. Think before you speak. These days, and this is not meant as a lecture at all, I take it myself as well. When I saw that comment, I'm like, oh my God, there's so many times I've used the word psycho just as a, just as a lazy kind of slang, right? Each of us has a role here. And the thing is that collectively, we create that safe space, and collectively we hold space for other people, and individually you get to be that person who can show up as an ally, who knows how to be empathetic, who knows how to listen. And I'm going to give you some statistics in a little bit to explain just why this is so important, especially in your cohort, in your age group. But also to say we've come a long way in India. I don't think even 5 years ago or 4 years ago when I set up the site, or 10 years ago, and I'm probably about double most of your age, so certainly not when I was in college, that we'd be able to have a forum like this to have these conversations openly. People did have counselors, but people didn't really know why people went to counselors. And you still have, even today in 2020, you will still have people coming up and saying, but why do you need to talk to someone professionally? Hum hai na. Are you not making these things up? Are you overthinking? Are you not feeling too much? Why are you so stressed? You have everything going for you. Just keep in mind that, whether you talk about anxiety or you talk about depression or you talk about stress, which is a huge, huge issue for so many of you as well, these are not all individual, aberrations. These are very, very common issues, and there are people who can help. And of course, here I'm talking about trained mental health experts, whether they're counselors, psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, who are trained to help when your regular coping mechanisms are not doing the job. So each one of us, I think, does have a role to play here, because you can also choose to be that person who stands up and says, I'm not, like I said, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be empathetic, I'm going to learn a few things so that if anyone around me in my immediate circle needs help, I might be the person that they reach out to. We have a few comics, like I said, in the book. On the website, it's completely free to access. If you have a chance, you can pick up the books and lend them around if you like. We've relied so much on people who have lived through what we call stories of lived experience. So globally, certainly, and here in India, the narrative is moving from this kind of top-down approach to center around people who have lived experience. So somebody who has dealt with depression, is dealing with depression. We have about 9 to 10 interviews in the first book on depression, which I co-authored with a therapist called Arpita Anand. And when we launched that book, I can tell you, it was last year, about 110 people, at IIC who were there at the launch. And one thing really stayed with me, which was somebody in the audience coming up later and saying that it was a huge deal for him to see so many different people just speaking openly about having depression, because he said, in our minds, we have these stereotypes, right? We have stereotype. Oh, somebody's asked for the books, comics, websites. Actually, great idea. I will ping that across to you. We have so many stereotypes in our mind about what is depression. Usually in the newspapers or print or or TV, you'll have like that one image of a lady holding her head in her hands. Here we had someone who was an academic. We had someone who was an IAS officer. We had someone who was, is a journalist. In the book, we have someone who'd gone to IIT. The point is, nobody is immune to it. Depression is not just something that affects either the too rich or the too poor, or not you, not me. It can affect anybody. And I think that's why I've taken this as it is very much a passion project of mine, as you can imagine. As a journalist, as a storyteller, as a writer, what we can do is create, as I said, that space for people to share their stories and let people know they're not alone. Now, it's an incredibly collective effort, and people shared very bravely, but that didn't mean they glossed over. No one who's dealt with depression or anxiety or any of these issues will tell you it's going to be easy and things will be, will get better in a moment. We're not here to give you some Hollywood, Bollywood kind of, take on what happens. The point is to have more unvarnished realities, right? To understand that things can be tough, but hey, somebody's got through it and this is what helped them. Another thing to understand is it's not, there's no one size fits all solution. Therapy might work for somebody else might not want therapy. A lot of people just keep saying, go shake it off. It is not so we do also address some of these myths and misconceptions, and I can see some questions popping up, which I'll try and come to as well. But the thing is, it takes incredible courage. We were talking about stigma, we were talking about discrimination. And if you take a minute to think about in your own circle, in your own families, it's not easy, when people are going through their most vulnerable or a very difficult phase, right? And all of us might have had an issue where, suppose, you did badly in exams, or you didn't get into the college you wanted, or you didn't, something went wrong. That's a slightly different thing than what I'm talking about. That has more to do with like your everyday ups and downs, right? You still need strategies to cope for that. But what therapists will tell you, and we have the actual therapists telling you in the book and on the website, what they will tell you is you need to be a little bit more concerned when it's a prolonged period, right? It's something is happening, you can't sleep, you've changed your eating habits, you're not able to snap out of it. And this is a very big myth that somebody who has spoken about mental illness or dealing with something is weak. They're, that they have no idea of how to just get over things. That's a huge myth. It has nothing to do with strength or weakness. It has nothing to do with your moral fiber, your character. It has nothing to do with, how you were brought up or, the kind of skills that you've learned along the way. It has a lot to do with many, many other things. And the narrative, again, here is shifting mainly to a psychosocial model, not just a biomedical model. So it's important, above all, to have a support system. And this is where each and every single one of you comes in. If I look at that WHO statistic that 1 in 4 people will have a mental health issue in their lifetime, that's a lot of us sitting here in this virtual, meeting. Are you going to be the kind of person who is able to learn a little bit more and learn how to be a little bit more empathetic? So if somebody in your friend circle, in your family, I hope it doesn't happen, but suppose somebody is going through something, that they can reach out to you and you will know where to go to, to help them. We have, a lot of people have third-party helplines, they have resources, and I'll ping that into the chat as well, healthcollective.in/contact. There, we put together a bunch. TIS in Bombay has a helpline called iCall, which is open and free. And they also have a crowdsourced spreadsheet, which a lot of people in the country have been putting in info on, city to city. So that's really helpful. But let me come back to a little bit about why we decided to do these Mindscape books, which I'll share more information with you on. The idea was, and we kicked it off with these real stories of dealing with depression, which I'll again ping into the chat. The idea was to share these stories of lived experience. As I mentioned, that book launch and the person saying that there are so many stereotypes. Every single person who shared their story, including one anonymously, wanted other people to know that they're not alone. They wanted other people to know, hey, look, we're getting through this. You can get through this as well. And I, above all, wanted to make sure that we have stories from India to resonate. So it's not just websites that you're looking up, which are great. They're amazing websites from all over the world. But we also sometimes need to know that this is not a foreign problem, right? Like this is like early on, 10, 15 years ago, probably you'd hear this more, that it's not really an Indian issue. It's very much an Indian issue. And it's a very complicated issue. So I can't even, I don't want to also oversimplify and tell you things are just, we want to be very clear. We want to equip ourselves with the right kind of knowledge. And we don't want to lose the nuance and details as well. So the idea of the books, and they are quite conversational. They're meant to be a conversation starter. They feature first-person stories. The second book that came out earlier this year, which is more relevant perhaps to your age group, was called Young Mental Health. And usually child and adolescent psychiatrists talk about childhood up till about, say, 21, 22. But we looked at kind of adolescents and young adults. And for many ethical reasons, we wanted to talk to people looking back at what it was like to, deal with certain things. And here's where I do want to tell you, most of it is, we try to avoid as much technical jargon as possible, but we also wanted to tell you the facts. You can't do any research on mental health in this country without bumping into very painful statistics. And one of them, and I think a lot of you have seen the news this whole summer, one of them is that suicide is a leading cause of death for young Indians. It's pretty shocking to me, and I wasn't really aware of it fully until I started doing the research in this book. The leading cause of death for Indians between 15 to 29. And it is a shocking but very painful reality. So we spoke to a few people who had felt suicidal ideation, understood a little bit what helped them, what didn't help them. And there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, not just, obviously not just from me, but many, many stakeholders, including experts in this country. One of the things that all of you should be aware, and please take this again as point 3, if anybody ever tells you they're feeling distressed, and this is a best practice, which I must follow also as I tell you and talk about suicide, anyone feeling distressed or talks about ending it all, or that, that they're feeling suicidal, don't dismiss it. Don't tell them, no, you shouldn't feel that way. Try and find, get them to reach out to a professional for help. There are suicide helplines in this country that, there are a bunch of them. We have them on the website as well. And again, several foundations have set up. Hopefully at some point there'll be a centralized number from the government, but you must let people know that help is available. And this is something we want to work with media as well. Every time a journalist does a story on somebody attempting suicide or somebody dying by suicide, it's important to let people know that help is available. It is a shocking reality. A lot of people were startled by this, that, that this is the leading cause of death from 15 to 29, 15 to 39, these age groups. And the other thing, I guess, that's important for your cohort and age group is that when you talk to psychiatrists about the most common issues that come up with young mental health, and again, thinking childhood, adolescence, but also young adulthood, so your age, depression and anxiety and stress come up, bullying comes up, there's a lot of self-harm, body image, eating disorders. And I hope none of you get triggered by what I'm talking about here. If you are feeling triggered, you can feel free to disconnect, take a time out, reach out to somebody professional to talk about. I hope that I can emphasize enough that, we need to have a way to talk about these things without hurting each other's feelings, without triggering each other, but also figure out a way forward. So one is to raise the awareness and have the conversations, but two is, where do you go after that? We're covering a lot of issues that as they come up with the pandemic, for example, and I'll give you a personal anecdote. I was on an emotional roller coaster. I think it was in March. I was just all over the place, like, crying, upset, not understanding what's going on, and incredibly privileged, right? As somebody who's incredibly privileged, there was also this guilt of like, oh my God, you're so privileged. How can you even be feeling this way? And then I did this short course that this professor from Canada has on Coursera. He done an intro to psych course, which I'd taken. He had a short course specifically for this pandemic, and I interviewed him later. And the course is called Mind Control for anyone who wants to look it up. It's really interesting because one of the things he says is, if you're not feeling anxious during something like this, which is a pandemic, then you're just not paying attention. Your body and mind are wired to be anxious right now because there's so much going on and it's so stressful. Of course, you're going to be anxious. And just knowing that probably everyone in the world is feeling this at the same moment helped. And of course, then he had a few tips on how to, when you are feeling this way, what are some of the things you can do to regain control? Because there's so much that's not in our control, right? Will they create a vaccine? Will we all get the vaccine? What's going to happen? And a couple of the things they said was to carve out time just for yourself. And this is something I encourage all of you to do. You're, of course, at that age where you are, there's so much you need to think about, like college and your future and what are you going to do next. You still need to figure out a little way of carving out some time for yourselves. And then he had some tips like how to, self-care and what that involves. And I can send that link to you as well. He also had something like, do a project, something where you can help other people. And that can be very, very helpful. It could be something very simple. You could be calling your nani or dadi. You could be calling an older relative. You could be calling somebody who doesn't have people around them. A simple thing like that, doing one call a week. What is it going to really cost us? It will make you feel better. It will make a difference in their lives at this time when everyone is so stressed out as well. So, we do have a lot of things to talk about, and I'm just trying to keep it quite concise so we can get to your questions as well. For the people who think that mental health is not an Indian issue, again, remember what I told you, mental health affects everyone. Every single person has mental health. And I have an interview with Dr. Vikram Patel, who's a very senior psychiatrist, who made this point to me very clearly, saying we always confuse the two. Mental health issues, though, mental illness, mental disorders, are estimated to affect at least 150 million Indians. And less than 30 million Indians are seeking care. There's actually a survey done by NIMHANS, the National Mental Health Survey, which was commissioned by the Health Ministry. And they found there's a huge, less than 30 million people seeking care from this number of 150 million. Of course, the numbers in India probably are going to be much, much higher. But I do want to say that I think in the years that I've been covering mental health as a reporter and now as a writer, there has been a lot of positive as well. We do know that people are feeling a little bit more that they can talk about things. At least things like anxiety and depression are coming into our mainstream conversations. Though I should clarify again, when we talk about depression, one of the big myths is if I'm feeling blue or I'm upset, I'm depressed. And when somebody has a clinical disorder of depression, that's the same thing. It's really not, right? And that disconnect and that confusion is why, if I think that when I'm feeling blue, that's depression, why can't that person just snap out of it? We do need to understand a little bit about the disorders before we start, talking about, I suppose, publicly or amongst ourselves. And this year we saw the media discourse, that it can do a lot of damage. This is something that's known. Again, coming back to what I was talking about, suicide, it's known that when we don't follow best practices, we can do a lot of damage. So I think that, we have something on the website on tips on how to talk responsibly about mental health. It's mainly meant for journalists, but you can take a look at that as well. And it does start with, I think the overarching principle should be do no harm. I do want to show you a few of those slides, and then maybe we can try and come to some of your questions. But again, I think if you look at the narrative, and the whole point of this talk was to talk about how it's shifting. It is shifting. We are starting to have these conversations in India. We need to have them in more languages than English. We do have a landmark legislation now. Mental health care is supposed to be covered by insurance, or and that's something that has to be tracked. But I hope that some of this is helpful to you, and let me start putting some of the links in. But let me see if I can share the comics I was talking about. And of course, we can share the links with people as well. Window or screen? Okay, well, allow entire screen. I'm definitely going to come to your comments as well. Okay, wait, hold on a second. Am I presenting yet? No. Can you guys see this? Not sure.
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, great. Thank you. So these are the two books in the Mindscape series. So as I said, these were commissioned. Actually, I don't know if I said. A 3-book series was commissioned by Simon & Schuster. The first one is the story I was talking about, the real stories of dealing with depression, where we have 9 or 10 first-person stories, and psychologist Arpita Anand has helped with some of the commentary and sharing tips for people who might be reading it. The second book came out earlier this year, which is Young Mental Health, and I co-authored that with Bengaluru-based therapist Meeraharan Alva. And again, so in this one, we've actually again put stories of people who have dealt with some of those issues I brought up, like bullying, depression, anxiety, stress, suicide or self-harm. We've put helplines in so people can know where to reach out for help. Meera has a bit of a handbook for parents as well. But it's also important for us that this is a conversational kind of book. It's not like an academic, there's not too much jargon. We've been as conversational as we could be without simplifying too much. And so yeah, if any of you pick it up, do let us know what you think, because we do want this discourse and conversation to continue. This is the comic I was talking about. So this Kishore Mohan is an artist based in Kerala who worked on this with me, based on what a real person mailed, sort of DM'd to say, these are all words that can hurt, right? So if there's, like I said, one thing you're taking away from this talk today, maybe let's just not use these words as insults. Schizo, psycho, these are not insults. We can think of other creative ways to insult people. Let's not use mental illness as slur, because you never know who you're impacting. Again, like I said, these are very, very common issues that affect many, many people. And it's just, this might not be who you want to be. You might want to be a better person than that. So let's try and avoid using slurs from mental illness. Another thing to think about, this is again by Kishore for the Health Collective. I'm sure most of us have done this. There's nothing wrong with this, but this is something just to think about, that, people are not going to always look or project how they are or how they're feeling. And we do this as well. There's this concept of public, cells and masks and stuff, right? So you never know what someone is going through. And it comes back to my whole, if you can be kind, because it is, it's an interesting journey. There's you have long lives ahead of you, and things can be very tough. So if you can cut someone some slack, cut someone some slack. This was a comic in the book as well. The artist Pig Studio, who did this on what it feels like to have depression. It's not really popping so well on the screen, but if you go on the website, you'll see it. Just literally feeling overwhelmed. This is her depiction of what it's like to have depression. And another one with Kishore on labels. I'll share a few of these just so you get a sense of, the comics. But there are, like I said, 300 stories on the website. If anyone feels that they want to delve a little bit deeper, I'll ping the website into your chat. This is the artist is known as Solo. I spoke about this with a bunch of high school kids, and it was incredible how much they resonated with. Bullying is something that happens in every I suppose walk of life, in every school and every college. And it's important that we also acknowledge it's happening and figure out ways to help each other. This is one of the comics. I might end on this affirmation and self-love, because we have an affirmation series. It is important to learn that you need to take a time out for yourself. Like I said, no matter where you are on this mental health spectrum, we all have mental health. You can have good days and bad days, and you might have a mental illness or mental health disorder, which is perfectly normal and perfectly fine, is my overarching message to you. Whoever we are and whatever we're going through, it's important to take a time out for yourselves as well. and know how to, be kind to yourselves. So I think that self-care, it's overused a little bit, but self-care is something that we need to also learn how to do. And it's hopefully something that you can pick up at this age. It will stand you in very good stead as you grow older. Let me take a beat there and try and look at some of the questions that have come up. I don't have, I can see I'm a journalism student. That's great, Shivani. I'm glad to hear it. Anyone have any questions? Do you guys want to ask anything, or should I go through the chat box?
We also floated a form, and we have got some responses. So we have few questions from there. So if you want me to read it out to you, I'll just do that, and you can answer them.
That'll be perfect. And I'll just put some of the links in the meanwhile.
Yeah.
Also, because of the time constraints, we'll have to filter questions a little bit.
Sure.
So we can
club
ones which are repetitive and stuff.
Yeah. So will one of you,
please have a look at the form.
Will one of you club them and let me know?
Yeah, I'm doing that. And I think, meanwhile, I'll also acknowledge how you gave us an insight about that, because I don't think a lot of people would know that mental health is something that, everybody has. Mental health and mental health issues sometimes just go hand in hand, and we can perceive them to be synonymous terms. I mean, people with eating disorders are also sort of patients to mental health, but we don't notice that. And that is very sad. I mean, so I think we have a first question. Right. So I don't know who has sent in this question. This is an anonymous question, but the question is how to avoid feeling of competition, because competition in our age is something that incites feelings of suicidal feelings, basically. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very, that's an important question. So again, anyone who's written in that they're feeling suicidal, I just want to say, let me ping that first things first, a suicide helpline. I want you all to keep these with you. You can look up any more and just have them handy. We need to let people know that, help is available. We need to not minimize what someone is going through. But when you talk about competition, again, I guess most of you are almost 20, and I went to university years and years ago, down the road from Hindu, as it were. But it was always competitive, right? India has always been competitive. I know things are getting more stressful and things are getting more hectic. And it's always, when you're looking at things from that lens of I need to make my career, make my job, make my name, it's a lot of pressure. And we have to collectively, and again, this depends, of course, right, on your other stakeholders, on your parents, on your families, on your colleges, on your mentors as you grow older. We need to take a step back and just realize there is a bigger picture out there. Okay, there is competition that's healthy, which you learn much, much, much later, I think, as you start working. And there's competition that's just not healthy and just not worth it. And some of the, again, this is probably a good question for a therapist to answer. As I mentioned, I'm a storyteller and a writer, but my 2 cents is it's important to have a friend, have a family member, give you some perspective on that.
Also, I think it's very important to know that a counselor, a therapist, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, all of them are different persons. They're not the same person.
Yes.
And we have a question which asks something around the same lines.
Yeah.
The question says that how do we address mental health issues among medical college students, and how to know whether to visit a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or just a therapist or a normal counselor, or talk to a relative?
That's a really good point. So I have this I just grabbed the book. I don't know if you guys can see it, but basically this is the Young Mental Health book, and my co-author Meera put this in very helpfully. Who do you go to? How do you know what the difference is? Who's a psychologist? Who's a clinical psychologist? Who's a therapist? Who's a counselor? Who's a psychiatrist? Now in India, I'll tell you one thing. To be honest with you, there are some challenges because it's not very well widely known. There are not enough experts. But I will leave the academic work, and I do want to tell you some of it is going on behind the scenes as we speak. A lot of people are working to train more and more folks as that first layer of help. If you're feeling, and especially medical college students, you might want to talk to someone who's been through what you've gone through. Try and find a sort of mentor and ally in that space, but also you probably want to look for a counselor first. You don't usually need to jump straight to a psychiatrist, though of course, if you know a psychiatrist, feel free and they'll probably refer you back down. Mostly people will go with counselor or therapist. And then if they think you need to speak to a psychiatrist, you can speak to a psychiatrist. But again, this is a very good question, and I think it is very confusing for a lot of people. So thanks for asking that.
Another one, I think what I decipher out of this question is that The question is basically how money affects mental health. And one question, like I'd add to it, is that do you think mental health, addressing mental health basically is very economical? Because I have seen therapists charging a lot, or maybe, like we are student
Yeah,
community, we don't really earn, and we
of
have the
course.
most problem.
Yeah.
So how in India can we tackle this whole
So
thing?
a lot of institutes
Yeah.
have in-house counselors and therapists. For example, the IITs do it as a matter of course now. I did interview somebody. So again, in this book, not to plug my book a million times, but in this book, we spoke to someone called Paras Sharma. He set up in Bengaluru and Mumbai, set up something called the Alternative Story. And it's because he studied psychology. It's because he also talks about his own journey. I think he realized that this price point that you mentioned is a huge issue, right? So we've been asking people. So for example, the Alternative Story and Paras and his team, you can look them up online. They do a pay as you go, pay as you want model. I think the minimum is about 100 to 200 rupees, but they are figuring out a model that allows them to charge different people according to what they can afford. And I think that's one way to go. Somebody else pointed out, and again, this is the challenge, right? I mean, if you go to a government hospital, it's very affordable. I think with us, the choke point is that there's so many people who need those services. You could start by looking at, suppose you want to try, like I call the helpline, that spreadsheet I spoke about, which I'm actually going to ping into the chat, and maybe I can mail the organizers, and whoever's interested, you can take it from them as well. They do have a spreadsheet which people have shared price ranges. So you'll also have comments like who's LGBTQ friendly, who's inclusive, who's willing to adjust their rate essentially. And most people, I think, that I've spoken to, at least I hope this is the case, will give students a discount. So don't let that be the reason you don't. But let me try and find that iCall spreadsheet for you while you take the next question.
Yeah, the next question is how can we normalize therapy sessions in our country? So basically, I think this question is more pertaining to how, parents or people who are elder to us, they do not accept people who are basically going to take a therapy. We look down on the people who
Yeah.
come out as people who are taking help or seeking help from a medical institution. How do we do away with it?
Yeah. So you know what? My money's on you guys, because I honestly, the younger people I speak to, the more open you are. And I think that that's the only way this is going to change. I'm going to be 40 next year. And I think my generation has also kind of moved the needle because more people have come out to speak about this openly. But if we don't make the changes, it's what I was saying earlier, if we don't make the changes in our own families, in our own friend circles, as you move into the workforce, if we don't make the changes in our own circles, we'll keep doing these conversations once or twice a year, and it won't really make a difference. It's easy to sit and say, I blame that person and I blame that person. And actually, my uncle was like this and my aunt never understood, or my grandfather or my grandmother. But it's all possibly true. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But blaming people doesn't take us very far, right? So I do think our grandparents' generation, perhaps our parents' generation, had many, many different things to worry about and didn't have necessarily the vocabulary or exposure to understand some of these things. And a lot of studies have been done in India since then. So it's up to us now, right? So I would say if you take this, and there are 144 people on this call, if 140 of you go into tomorrow and next week and next month, and don't forget that mental health is an issue. I'm not saying mug up everything I'm telling you. Just remember that it's something that affects people and there's nothing wrong with that. It will make a difference.
Right. Another question speaks about like we all start talking about mental health issues and mental illness the day when an actor suicides or a week from that. But then how to make this a consistent thing, how to keep this in talks and in conversations and in dialogues forever, how to sort of retain the whole essence of the reality of mental health and taking care of it. We take care of our health, but we take care of our mental health.
Yeah. That's a really good question. Wait, sorry. I'm just pinging in the iCall crowdsource spreadsheet. I want you all to have that. That's in the chat. A lot of people have put in city-wise. So if anyone wants that as a reference, please use that. It is not a once-a-day thing. You're right. And it shouldn't be. I think this summer, actually, for the first time in a long time, I was quite bummed to see how the discourse in the media was, right, following the prominent suicide. And it's one of the things that I've been hearing from when I was reporting for a news channel for several years, that the mainstream media can do a lot of damage by reporting irresponsibly, right? there are many things that happen when somebody who's already feeling very distressed, potentially suicidal, can see that kind of story. And there are very clear guidelines for the media, which they need to start following to save lives. What you and I can do is, one, what I said, and I can repeat it ad nauseum because I do feel it does make a difference. Tell people that these helplines are available. Tell people that there are suicide helplines available if it comes to that. But other than that, let people know that it's a safe space. You know, that if one of the psychiatrists was telling me, the more people we have at like the base of this pyramid, which are regular people, lay people like me, like you, whatever field you're in, right? It doesn't have to be that all of us are going to be actually going and we're obsessed with psychology and we're all going to be psychologists. No, it would be great if we had more in India, but that's also fine if you're not. If more of us actually were able to at least learn some of the basics, there are these psychosocial, like first aid, psychological first aid short courses. There are suicide gatekeeper training courses, very short, a couple of hours, that kind of tell you how to respond, what to do. If more of us even cared, like I said, to be kind and not use, insult, like somebody pinged to ask about, I think the slur thing, it's not about making people feel bad for what they're going through, right? If we just kind of were there as a helping hand and ear, and even if you don't have the bandwidth, again, coming back to self-care, you're not always going to be that person who has the bandwidth. You might be having a really shitty or very bad day. You might be going through a lot yourself. It's enough to be there to tell someone that, I'm not feeling up to it, but I do think you should talk to someone, right? There are ways of learning how to navigate these conversations. And I think don't fall into that trap of only thinking about mental health once a year. I don't want you also all to go with getting more stressed about this. It's not, this shouldn't be one more on your list of 900 things to do, right? This is already happening. Whether we know it or not, 1 in 4 people are having an issue. It could be in my circle, it could be in your circle, it could be just we just don't know about it. So when you get free time and you want to read a little bit up, you can read on our website. There are many great, White Swan Foundation has a lot of articles in many languages. The Health Collective I mentioned, which is our site. Look at some of the, there are, different social media accounts which are constantly giving people information and stuff. And take as much as you want, as much as you have the bandwidth for, but don't forget those 3 things. We all have mental health. If you can do nothing else, just be kind. That will go a long way as well. And the third thing was, if anyone says that they're feeling distressed, please direct them to professional help.
We have a question from Swaraj Vich. He asked that a lot of times positivity, the strenuous, toxic positivity is imposed on individuals. So how can we as teenagers and people in our late, early 20s can do away with it or dodge away with it?
Sorry, say that again, toxic positivity?
Right. Toxic positivity or images and expectations from family, from peer groups, from also social media.
Yeah.
How can we do away with it?
Yeah,
I mean, that is true. I mean, even from personal experience, the whole discourse is if you try and reach out to someone, they're like, just stay happy. Yeah. Life is so good.
That's sometimes worse, right?
You divert yourself. I mean, that's not pure.
I completely agree. I think that, so I always feel it's like the pressure we put on people to perform a certain thing, right? It's not always going to be rosy. It's not always going to be like, I'll shake it off. And that's the whole challenge and issue, which is why I think so I guess we'll all look at it from what our different skill sets are going to be. Some of you will be trained and some of you will become therapists. And I think that's great. And some of you won't. But for example, as a journalist, there's somebody who said that they're, going to be a journalist as well. My skill set has been as a journalist, and it has been to do interviews, and it has been to bring stories out, right, that I think are important, or a channel thinks are important, or a newspaper thinks is important. So to combat what you just said about toxic positivity, I don't censor what somebody wants to share. Like there have been 1 or 2 stories I might not have shared because the psychologist said, look, that might be a little bit too much. It could be very triggering for people. But if somebody wants to share what it's like to go through depression, we're not going to take out the bits about how hard it is, because that does a disservice, right? It makes it feel like, oh, you can just like in a Hollywood moment, like, talk to somebody and then the next day you're feeling fine. No, it is a journey, right? There are ups and downs. There are people who've shared their stories and then come very openly on Twitter or other places and said that they're really, really struggling. So I think, how do we get rid of that? I don't know how we get rid of it, but we cannot contribute to it. So if 144 of us, or 138 now, people are dropping off, but if we decide we're not going to be the people pressurizing other people, like, so if I'm having a bad day and Joyita asks me, how are you feeling? If I feel, I can tell her I'm actually having a shitty day. I don't want to talk about it, but I'm not doing great. she should not feel pressurized to tell me, no, but you have such a wonderful life. And we do it out of good intentions, right? Or vice versa, right? I might want to tell you, look, you're so bright, you're in a wonderful college, you're doing, your whole life is ahead of you. It's all true, and I really mean it. You have a wonderful life ahead of you. But in that moment, it will feel like pressure to you. So I think it's about finding the people who are, I don't want to overuse authentic, but find people you can talk to who are authentic, who ignore the rest if you can. And it's really hard. And I think social is making it harder. There's a lot of peer pressure and it's really tough, but just know that you'll find your tribe. And it's hard to do at this age, but you will find them. And there are a lot of, people who are talking quite honestly and openly now. So I hope you will find, the folks who you can speak to.
Also, how to maintain a balance between giving them the space or sort of tackling them and being with them. Many a times people say that when people express their distress, we should be with them and direct them to professionals or do something about it and stay with them. Is that the correct approach? Or if they ask for space, we should actually give the space? And if we give the space, would the space become risky and would it lead to them doing something that is unasked for?
That is a tricky one. So, this is also tying in, somebody asked about what you do when someone doesn't want help. You can't force people. But you can tell people I'm here. And I think, like, if it's a friend, if you've ever tried to lecture a friend, it's not going to go well, right? So if you've ever tried to tell someone, oh my God, that guy is terrible for you, or you're in a shitty relationship, I don't think you should be, or anything where you're giving someone gyan, it does not go well. What you need to be is letting people know, I think this might help, right? It's all about, I think, your tone, your conviction. And if someone says, look, I need space, you need to give them a little space. If you're worried about them physically harming themselves, then you do have a responsibility to tell somebody, right? A parent, a trusted person. If you can, try and get someone to talk to. I mean, if they don't want to talk to their family, but you think they might talk to a professional. I've seen people set up the call, like set up the appointment and say, look, it won't be any bother. I will take you to the appointment. I'll set it up for you, and you don't have to tell me anything. That might be a way to be a friend, But at the end of the day, like, you can't drag someone kicking and screaming also. If you're concerned, again, like I said, like, have a little bit of, you use your judgment a little bit. But if you're actually concerned something might be seriously wrong, try and call an adult in, or expert as well.
There is another question from Anand Mishra. And since you're a journalist, I think it's a perfect question for you. He asks that, ma'am, do you think that scientific news or mental health centric news should also be a part and parcel of the mainstream news? Like, people are only showing crimes and international relations. So do you think mental health should also come and creep into the mainstream news?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it started to happen maybe a lot more because of this year. You'll see more reporting on mental health, because this is a year that it's the year of years. The whole world is going through anxiety and tension and stress, and people are talking about mental health in lockdown or unlockdown or whatever we're in. But I think it does need to be more sustained. I'm not sure that editors feel exactly the same way, but hopefully in the next few years, you'll see more of this. And somebody else has said, not about the media, but Shreya, don't you think psychology should be made a compulsory subject in school? It's almost a life skill. Oh yeah, 100%. There are people who think that it should be like a life skills training from primary school on, to teach you how to self-care, regulate what you can, deal with stress and anxiety, 100%. I mean, if any of you go into education, please try and push for that. That will be amazing.
Right. There is another question that somehow asks about what are the first primary signs of depression that people should notice and acknowledge?
Primary signs of depression. Again, I'm not the therapist, so I will tell you what they say here. And somebody has said, this is interesting. Depression is actually a learned behavior, which is why empathy doesn't help, I think, most of the times. Anisha, I don't think it's a learned behavior. I think what we've heard from the experts, and I'm happy to have you go through some of the myths and facts. It is something that affects, like, again, I have to look at the stats. It's a very, very common issue, and it's like we said, not a sign of weakness. It doesn't affect just one pocket or another pocket. And it's also not the case that everyone needs medication. It's also not the case that everyone needs therapy, but you do need to understand what you have, and then you need to learn coping skills, and then you get to choose, right, what works for you or what doesn't work for you. So the time, one of the, what Arpita said in this is, there are a couple of psychologists who've told us what you can look out for to see if someone is depressed. As a friend or family member, if you see a change in the way someone is behaving, if they're withdrawn all of a sudden, not communicating the way they normally do, If you notice a particular lack of interest in activities they used to love, like hobbies, suddenly someone has gone off them, changes in sleep and appetite, significant loss or gain of weight, these things usually over a couple of weeks. So it's not like it's just happened Friday, and you knew that I failed a test on Friday and I don't want to talk to anyone till Monday, right? That's quite understandable and it's probably normal. You still should probably try and reach out to me, but that might not be depression. If it's been a couple of weeks and I used to, go hiking with you and in normal times when there's no lockdown, but I no longer am interested in taking your call. I don't want to go hiking. I'm not talking to anyone. You've checked with a few of my friends. My parents are worried because I'm not sleeping or I'm not eating. If it's a bit longer, then there's definitely a sign that something is going on, and it doesn't hurt to reach out, to a therapist. So again, I'm not a therapist, and you should take everything I say with a grain of salt. But ask the experts. You can go on our website, go on these other websites, look at common signs. And some of you asking these questions, it's because you've noticed something with friends or family or loved ones. There are some common kind of warning signs, and you don't need to panic, right? The idea is to know that there are people who are trained to deal with this, right? And their job is to literally figure out a way for people to cope. And one thing I will say I took away from reading all of these stories and meeting these people who shared, if they'd known they were just not the only ones going through it alone, it would have made a huge difference.
Right. So as a person that has read extensively about mental health and mental health issues, do you think there is a cutoff? Is there a particular age section, like do children below 15 years of age or 10 years of age for that matter also face such problems, or is it just us thinking that, oh no, we the youth basically faces it?
Children 100% have, I mean, so the young mental health, we talked to a child and adolescent psychiatrist, Dr. Amit Sen, who wrote the foreword for us. And Lavanya has also asked, can you please tell us about child depression? Do children battle depression? Yes, they can. So he's actually, so again, in that book, and you can look on our website if you want to get the book, but they basically split up age-wise, what are some common issues that come up. And usually with kids, they say the sooner you bring them in, the better. It can be mood disorders. It can be a lot of people, attention deficit is getting a lot of attention these days. But if kids are showing signs that something is up, there's usually something up. They just don't have the vocabulary to tell you, which is why I think it's important to, again, learn as much as you can and see when people need to get help. Sorry, Divya is saying only some form questions are being asked. Okay, I think that's also because of the time, but you can send these questions in also if any of you want to. Whichever I'm equipped to answer, I'll answer, or we'll try and get someone else to answer you.
We're like sort of filtering questions because a lot of them are dealing with the technical things, and we realize that you're not
and diagnosis of depression.
Yeah, that's really tough. So what you guys can do though is if you want to mail it to us, we'll put it to a psychiatrist and you guys can send them back to the people. That you can do later.
Sure.
There's this question, I think you could take it up. People and the government basically, or organizations basically, they do not allocate a budget for mental health. There is a lot that is being done about the normal health, so to say, and other things. But like even for the budget, we don't see a total allocation of something related to mental health or something like that. So who funds it? How do we get about it?
So there has been, so health overall in the budget is there's an allocation. It's quite a modest allocation, but it's there. There are primary, so I think government hospitals, I was told, they have OPDs, which are supposed to be free for people to come in for mental health as well. It's a very good question. And until the Mental Health Care Act of 2017 sort of prompted people, it was not even covered by insurance. Now there's legislation that it should be covered by health insurance. Our IRDAI, which is the regulatory body, has said that health insurance providers have to cover. And I think that the challenge is, this is very new, right, in the last couple of years. So the challenge is making sure that that's being followed up on. Do people know it's available? What's actually available under that? It may be, organizations will cover some of it. Private organizations will cover. Sometimes I think the cost of counseling or match the cost of counseling. But it is, I think some of you have alluded to this, and Joyita certainly brought it up in the question. It can be very expensive, and there needs to be a structural solution to it, right? Because if you look at therapy, yes, it can be expensive, but if you look at someone who has a lifelong disorder and needs medication, those numbers shoot up exponentially. So there's definitely people advocating. There are stakeholders looking at, holding people accountable. And I think that's a challenge that's going to be ongoing for a while.
I think we'll take our last question for the evening, and this is a question asked by two people. There's Ashid and Chitransha who want to ask about how to let go of the toxic coping mechanisms.
Oops, what did I do? Sorry. How to let go of toxic coping mechanisms. Yeah, I really think I should have done a degree in therapy. It would have been more helpful for you guys. That's a good question. I mean, we should put that to a therapist, to be honest. If you are feeling that you have toxic coping mechanisms, that's literally their job, because we know that there are unhealthy coping mechanisms that many people, and there's no judgment here, but of course, like, drinking, drugs, like just blinding yourself, there's emotional eating, there's a lot of things that can dysregulate how you deal with your regular, deal with life and stress. And therapist jobs are to help you see that and figure out more healthy coping mechanisms. So that's a good one for an actual professional, I would say.
I think we'll take one more question because I think this is really, really important. We talk about mental health and mental health issues and how to tackle them in the urban setting predominantly.
Yeah.
What about the farmer suicides and the rural people who do not even, I don't think people know about what mental health means, like literally means.
No, that's actually, that is a really important question. So we know in the last few years, especially because of reporters, right, that there's a huge issue with farmer suicides. There are actual stakeholders working with the government on these issues. There are a couple. So there's somebody called Dr. Pathare, who I work with a little bit, have interviewed a few times, with the Center for Mental Health Law and Policy in Pune. And he was telling me in one of our interviews about Atmiyata, which is something that he and his team work on. They've done a huge pilot in Gujarat and then Maharashtra. It's no longer a pilot, where they work on suicide prevention in rural areas. They work on suicide prevention. There are a few other NGOs working in this space and then working with the government. So this intervention is with government support, because only the government can, frankly, at the end of the day, scale these up, right? These interventions. So they do work with primary healthcare workers, Anganwadi workers, training them so that they can screen for things like depression and stuff. And those initial pilots were quite phenomenal. So I think that's something that can be replicated in other areas. He's also someone who's been pushing for India to restrict access to pesticides. There has been evidence, in the neighborhood, like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, other countries, that when you restrict access to something that's been used a lot, it will have a direct impact. So, there's definitely a lot more work. I mean, again, maybe the way to conclude this is we've come a long way. I don't think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we even knew what some of the statistics are, how prevalent some of these issues are, or what India could even do. I think in the last 10 years, certainly, and looking at people who've spent decades of their life on this, the actual experts I'm talking about, there has been a lot of forward movement in that. And that, the Mental Health Care Act was one important piece of legislation, but people are turning their attention to suicide prevention now. And I think everyone has a role to play in that.
Although I said we are taking the last question, but the president of the society has a question, so we'll take it up.
Okay. Is there any other question which we're going to take before that?
No, I think yours will be the final last question. Last question.
Okay, so mine, I'm not really sure if it's a question, but I've had my own fair share of experiences with mental health professionals. And as a part of the LGBTQ community, I feel that there's a lack of required sensitivity, which, our mental health professionals, sort of have. And I just wish to, sort of know what you, sort of feel about this. And if there's anything which you've come across in your research or in your experience, I mean, this is not even talking about the mental health professionals, registered mental health professionals who blatantly endorse in conversion therapies. But, that is a different discussion altogether. But over here, I'm talking about the seemingly progressive therapists who are not really, I mean, the fact is that the society in which we're living in, it is full of social inequities. Social inequities which harm our mental well-being. And, when we have therapists and mental health professionals who are not sensitized about these social inequities, I personally feel that it just puts the patients in a really tough position.
No, you're absolutely right. And I wish that it was not the case. I mean, I've lost track of people who have been put off therapy completely because they've, had a very bad experience. And I wish that wasn't the case. So what can we do about this? I think that it's too big of an issue for any one person, and that sometimes puts people off doing anything, right? Because it's like, it's just too vast of an issue when you look at the numbers and how many people need to get help. But I do think that iCall spreadsheet, which I've shared with you guys, it's a crowdsourced spreadsheet. So, obviously take it with a pinch of salt. But one of the things that I find important there is, for example, they do have a category there to say how LGBTQIA plus inclusive is a therapist, how progressive is a therapist, what is the cost range, are they willing to, so people have put their comments in. It's one way to filter. And I know it's not the perfect way because it is crowdsourced, so how much you trust, how much you not trust, but it is worth, when we have allies or friends who can help, I think above all, we need our own support system as well. So, if somebody is going in for therapy and has a bad experience, there should be someone else they can talk to, and that's the friend you can be, right? Where you can be like, look, I will do some research and I will try and find out for you 2 or 3 people that we can talk to. And you're 100% right. I mean, we have a story in the first book from Anand Zanane who talks about the pressure he felt he couldn't come out as a journalist even, and journalism is supposed to be so progressive. And he introduced me to Anvesh Pokuluri, who was, this young IIT and a petitioner in that landmark, the case in the Supreme Court. He writes about some of there are very specific challenges with different communities. And I think it's important for us to get as inclusive and understand how intersectional all of these things are, which is why earlier on I was saying, it's not like the model nowadays is no longer just a top-down, expert 2-person kind of model. It has to be more psychosocial. It has to be more centered around the person who's going through the lived experience. And I wish there was an easy answer for this, right? I just wish we could be like, okay, look, tomorrow we'll make sure that there are 3,000 people who are just trained and ready to go. But I think we need to keep people accountable as well, and if there's somebody who's, as a person, you should know your rights. If there's a therapist who you feel is crossing the line or is not doing a good job, know full well you don't have to go back to that person. Maybe don't be put off therapy completely. Of course, it's very natural, but try and find somebody or have a friend help you find somebody who might be more human, I think,
Thank you. Yeah, that did make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense and it was very insightful because I think talking about this and exploring various aspects and the substreams of mental health is very, very important. It's absolutely imperative. And with you this evening, I think we explored our bit into it. And I think all of us are now a bit more conscious and we wouldn't use certain terms that probably we use them as giveaway terms a lot of times, I think. So being sensitive.
That would be great.
Yeah, we would. So being sensitive is one, and being aware of the fact that all of us have a mental health is the second major takeaway from today's session. I'd like to thank you for being here, and I would also request Amitoj to give the thank you note.
Hi everyone. So if all of those people who don't know me, I'm Amitoj. I'm the president of the society. And it has been an amazing session. I personally got to learn quite a lot of new things and really interesting dimensions when we talk of, the perspectives and challenges around mental health, specifically in our society. And I feel that all of the attendees who've joined in today, they had something constructive to take back. And, I'd like to thank all of the attendees who've joined us today evening in, helping us extend campus-based discourse around mental health issues. We would also like to thank Friends Corner, Hindu College, who were our event partners. They've helped us in increasing traction and organizing this session. We organize colloquium sessions pretty frequently, so stay tuned. We are actually organizing another colloquium session next week on 26th. It's around gender and public policy. It's a really interesting session, and over there we'll be speaking in greater depth about what are the gendered challenges to public policy and what can be policy interventions, etc., etc. On behalf of the Symposium Society, I thank you, Amrita ma'am, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for organizing this. That's awesome. Thanks.
With that, we come to an end for this session. I hope you all have filled up the feedback form, and thank you.